Welcome, everybody, to another edition of Keep the Line Moving, the podcast designed to talk about leadership, life, and inspiration. I am your host, Chris Gargano, and for episode 106, we're talking about something simple yet very difficult: public speaking. How do you get better at the art of public speaking? Many of us feel nervous, anxious, imposter syndrome, uncertain about our topic. I can go on and on. These questions will be answered and so much more with our guest, Eva Rose Daniel. She runs the company called The Speaker Shop. She's very active on LinkedIn. You can find her posts regularly. All of them have value, and I am not exaggerating. And this conversation has value. Whether you give a talk to 5 people in a meeting or 3 people on Zoom, or 50 people in a larger meeting, or 10,000, it doesn't matter. What we are going to talk about with Eva Daniel is so valuable for all of you in any circumstance regarding public speaking, the value of storytelling, humor, the use of your voice as a tool, pausing and engaging the crowd, reading the room. So valuable. The conversation begins now with Eva Daniel on Keep the Line Moving. So Eva, I ask people all the time, what they do, but I said it in the intro, what you do, which is you help people craft stories so they are more comfortable, entertaining, and engaging as speakers. Is that safe to say? Is there anything I left out, or how would you round out what you do for folks?
Absolutely. Well, I help people both on that content side of public speaking. What are we going to say when we have that opportunity? And then, of course, the delivery side. How are we saying it in a compelling, interesting way for our audience? And sometimes even using that word public speaking sounds really big or grandiose, as if we're some big stage in a conference. Oftentimes, it can just be, how are you showing up to that Monday morning meeting that you're with 5 people, or on that Zoom call with 15? And I just do love storytelling. How do we tell better stories? I believe that stories truly are what change the world, and stories are what make our content stick. So I always have that be a really big part of all of the speeches that I help my clients with.
Oh my gosh, that's so important. And you distilled that perfectly. It could be a room of 5 people, 10 people, or 1,000. Storytelling brings them in. So let's just say there's a new CEO out there and they have to do something on Monday, right? And it's for 50 people and they're nervous and they don't know how to engage. And perhaps they're a little bit more serious in their delivery. What would you say to that case study that I've created for you?
A few things. One, if you do struggle with nerves, one of the best ways to start working those out of your system is getting in the pattern of practicing your content in front of real people prior to being in a bigger audience. If I'm that CEO and I'm speaking in front of 50 people, maybe it's of a new team that I'm leading, or maybe it's, another event. What would it look like on that Friday before to run it by 3 or 4 people in a smaller stake setting, to work through some of your content, figure out, okay, what am I trying to say? How am I trying to say it? Work through some of those nerves. So that would be one thing I would say. Another is just having a plan and a content flow from the content perspective. So I walk with my clients through a framework I've created called Spark, but having some level of flow to your content. What is just kind of the order I'm putting my thoughts down on paper? I'm not saying you're fully writing out your speech, whether that you take up 2 or 3 bullets or you are the type that fully writes it out. Knowing just kind of an organizational, where am I going? And then as far as just the delivery, I always say in that very first minute of speaking, that is your opportunity to make a first impression. Research shows that we make judgments within 7 seconds. So your first minute of speaking really matters. So make sure you're really using that first minute, not to be full of pleasantries or, oh, it's so great to be here and the weather outside and, here's a joke. Instead, really figure out what is a way that I can connect with my audience in that first minute to be compelling, to deliver this message. And then again, on the nerves, that first minute, I want you to ground yourself. And what I mean by that is I want you to confidently walk out, plant your feet shoulder width apart, drop your shoulders, open up your arms, make eye contact with someone, and smile. And for that first minute, just stay in that one spot to kind of ground yourself to the fact, wow, I'm speaking in front of people. And then if you want to start moving around, that's great. But a lot of times, even just grounding yourself in that first minute can help start reducing some of those nerves.
So there are people in leadership positions that think a certain way, right? I'm generalizing, but we all know where I'm about to go with this, which is this. I know my material. I don't need to practice. I'm going to go in there and I'm going to wing it. When I hear the term wing it with anything regarding leadership, life, or inspiration, what this podcast is all about, I have this like reaction, especially as I've gotten older. Research, preparation, repetition is so valuable, especially I would say in speaking. Would you agree? And do you have a visceral reaction when you hear the term that people wing it?
Okay, so I do have a visceral reaction. The larger the stage, the more intentionality you need to put in. And by large stage, I'm not even saying amount of people. You might be selling your business to one investor on a Zoom call, and that might be a really big, stage. I'm putting that in quotes. That being said, I love impromptu speaking. A lot of life is not planned, but we also need to make sure that we have enough structure within it to make sure that our speaking does have a point and that we don't end up on so many rabbit trails that we don't even know where we started. So I think it goes both ways. You need to learn to be better at off the cuff speaking. So there's room for both. The last thing we want is a canned, rote, inauthentic speech that we feel like somebody's, not being themselves. You want to bring the best, most authentic version of yourself to the stage. And usually for most of us, that's a combination of planned and then that planned spontaneity of parts in our presentation that we know that we want to make a funny comment about the wild and crazy carpet, or we want to make a comment about the, whatever big sporting event or whatever the thing was that happened the night before, but also making sure that you are intentional and having some level of plan. So I think it's both. But I think that too many people lean on the side of winging it and lack of preparation versus over prepared and being route in their delivery.
Right. You don't want to be stale. And you and I both come from the broadcasting world. It's called
Yes.
ad-libbing, right? But that doesn't mean we would go into a segment without anything unless everything went down, the teleprompter, or it was a breaking news situation. You had to go off memory. However, you have a script, you have a format. I ad-lib all the time. Life is ad-libbing. I don't know what I'm
Yes.
going to say at 4:38 this afternoon. I'm not planning it. But my
I
point
don't
is,
know what you're going to say in 5 minutes, but I'll respond. You don't know what you're going to say in 5 minutes. The listeners don't
no.
know. We're all going to figure it out together in about 5 minutes from now.
So when you get clients, when they come to you, where are they usually in their journey? Or do you get novice speakers? I know you get everyone from novices to CEOs that have done it 400 times, but where they're finding you for a reason. What is usually that reason?
The biggest reason, and this goes from kind of the more novice speakers, the leader who rose to position where suddenly they're speaking a lot, but maybe they never received any public speaking training, all the way up to I work with really high level professionals of large companies as well. The most consistent thing, though, they come to me because they've never received feedback for their speaking. I mean, after all, like who's going to tell the CEO or who's going to tell the boss that, wow, you're kind of dry in your presentations, or you use a lot of filler words, or wow, you are just not at all funny, or you tend to talk really long where we all just sort of zone out. Who's going to tell their boss or the CEO that? Because feedback's not a sandwich, it's not thinly veiled criticism, it's not listing off all the things you could be better. Real feedback is specific and clear and it's kind. It sounds something like, wow, the 5 minute mark to the 7 minute mark of your talk is a little dry. You need some humor, maybe something like this. Or wow, what you have the 20-minute mark of your presentation, that would make an incredible open. Let's open your talk with that, but we actually need to start that story a little bit deeper. Oh no, now there's a whole 20-minute mark. What are we going to do there? Well, let's think about this over here. And so people come to me because they need feedback. And then obviously sometimes there's just as you rise in leadership, hopefully you're also rising in opportunities. So maybe now you are being asked to give a breakout presentation at a conference. You are being invited onto podcasts. You are maybe needing to do a media hit for the local, TV station. And so sometimes it's just the rising of the opportunity that comes that they've never really got training. And sometimes it's just in general wanting to bring the best version of themselves to their team, to their company, and ultimately to the world.
So I just did my newsletter, my November newsletter, and in the middle of it was a section about how we as leaders sometimes think we are going to deliver a message. It's crystal clear. Where I went over everything. The directives were so clear They should have left that meeting and have been very actionable, and everything should have gotten done, but that didn't happen. It's all about the credibility of the person delivering the message, the trust of the person delivering the message. It's not just the message. How do you coordinate thoughts that make sense for folks in that realm?
Well, I think you really hit the nail on the head in a roundabout way there about audience. Who is your audience and what is the goal of your presentation? It's always important for all of us to remember that my speech, my presentation, my podcast guesting, your podcast hosting is not about me. It's about serving the audience. How can I serve my audience in a better way? I think a big piece can really be just kind of asking, the questions of, wow, before you even start brainstorming, before you even take your comments, of just asking some of those audience questions. What do I want my audience to know? What do I want my audience to feel? What do I want my audience to do with what they've heard? And becoming more audience centric in your content will make it stronger. I think a lot of us are just taking ourselves way too seriously. We want to bring our best selves to the stage. We want to bring our best selves to our team and inspire them. But people connect with people. And we want to speak conversationally. We want to not just share our successes, but our failures. We want to bring that authentic self to the stage.
I just wrote a bunch of takeaways that people connect with people. We take ourselves way too seriously. And now in the realm of public speaking, you can forgive folks, right, for taking themselves too seriously. However, their ultimate goal, I think we all would agree, is what you just said, is to connect with the audience. So the
Yes.
audience listens, right? So it might be asking questions. What is your way of presenting that skill set to somebody? Here's how you, aside from asking questions, in addition to asking questions, ways in which to connect to that audience.
Well, that's great. Well, and what I love, you were just kind of indicating even there is a range of abilities when it comes to public speaking. There's a lot of just base skills every leader needs to learn of how to develop content, how to develop delivery, and then the more you advance, what I love about public speaking as an industry so much is that you will never arrive. It's fun, but you could always improve. You could always be better. I have stories for days of clients that I've seen what I consider to be very, very high level speakers and leaders. I can't believe the diligence, the amount of time and work that they put into it. But in terms of audience engagement, wow, how do we better connect with our audience, with who we're speaking to? There's just a handful of really practical things that you can do. One is maybe there are, questions, asking reflective questions for your audience to ponder. Maybe it's rhetorical questions, taking a Q&A. I'm always really clear. Q&A is a wonderful way to engage your audience. You just don't want to end your presentation on a Q&A. If you do, you've given the control of your ending over to that last question asker. You can consider using props. You can consider bringing someone on the stage with you. If you're a CEO, if you're that leader, do you really need to be the one that gives the marketing update from, Q4? Or could you pull the person who really poured heart and soul into that project to come up for part of your presentation? And then, again, audience engagement, having incorporated in stories, having humor layered into your content when possible, and just kind of thinking it through again, always through audience centric of, we have this tendency, we just want to include all of the things because we are so close to all of our own content. We believe everything's important. Often we just have way too much content in our presentations and we're not letting it breathe because we have so much we've got to cover in the next thing. Well, could you cut back? Could you trim some of that content? Could you let it breathe more so that you can be a little more off the cuff and plan spontaneity and take questions from your audience throughout, or just integrate more in reflection time, or maybe even incorporating in some breaking up your content. But one of the big things is not to just in some ways give a 30-45 minute just chunk of me talking at you, but intentionally thinking, how can I break up this content, almost thinking of through in kind of like sections in your mind of, wow, maybe there's a little bit of video I could put in, a little inspirational 60-second video, or maybe there's an audience exercise. Maybe I can pull somebody on stage. Maybe I can give something away. People love winning things. It doesn't even matter what it is, but there's a lot of fun ways, innovative ways to just think through your content in a way of going, wow, how can I make this more engaging for the audience? And then again, on the practice thing, instead of just trying it out in front of a big group, toss the idea past your admin or someone on your team and say, hey, I'm thinking about giving away this really, this really huge, fruit basket or whatever that I was just given. What do you think? And getting someone else's input too, so that at least if it, fails miserably, you have somebody else to laugh with about the experience.
When we get up on stage or at the head of the table, wherever the presentation is taking place, we have a tool set, right? Let's think of it that
Yeah.
way, Eva,
Yeah.
right? You have a tool
There's a
set.
whole bunch of tools, and you got to just figure out which ones you need to pull out today for the kind of presentation you're giving.
But one of the basic, exactly, one of the basic tools is voice. So as you get a CEO or a leader or somebody you're working with more experience and have them self-aware and understanding their toolbox, right? Their skill set. Where does voice come into it? And you also said, because what I've learned in life, I have a fairly loud voice, and my wife and son are on the other side of the wall laughing right now, and so is my sister, who's been saying that my whole life. But anyway, I've learned that when I lessen it or pause a little bit more, I become more effective as a communicator. Now, I'm a professional at this. So my point is, but when you deal with CEOs, they have this toolbox that perhaps they're not aware of just yet, right? I'm not being disrespectful or patronizing. I'm just saying public speaking is hard. If they've never been critiqued and or given feedback, voice, pausing, and all of that is part of it. Fair?
Yes, absolutely. I love that you brought up pausing, because I think the power of the pause is one of the most underutilized tools in that public speaking tool belt. Vocal variety is huge in your presentation. And vocal variety is not just being loud, being quiet, it's also pausing, it's speeding up, it's slowing down. For those that want to start adding some more of that vocal variety into their language, look at your talking points you're planning on taking up. And like I said, it might be fully written out, it might be a handful of bullets, but look for what you kind of consider to be the big idea, the power line, the memorable statement, and highlighting it and think, okay, that's a big line. I need to speed up before giving that line. And then I'm going to let it sink in. Do I need to actually really, really slow down and then speed up? Do I need to get loud? Do I need to get quiet around that line? But you're probably going to want to do something around that line instead of just barreling through it all at one tone. Vocal variety. Another thing, another few things that you can consider doing beyond just that tip is being more animated in your storytelling, so allowing your body to also kind of match what you're saying. Obviously, comedians are masters of this. I'm not telling everybody to be a comedian. We're going to leave that to, the greats, but thinking through, wow, how do comedians deliver content? They're having a lot of fun with it. Their face is matching what they're saying. So if you are sharing a story or teach about being incredulous about the Q4 marketing numbers, like have your face match it and be like, whoa, when I saw this number, or even leaning in, when I saw this, I could not believe it. Oh, well, now everybody's leaning in with you. And so looking for some of those things. And then also, if you are someone who uses a lot of filler words, it can be really distracting. So, on that vocal variety, that vocal pacing, you don't need to cut all of your filler words. But if they are distracting, when you're also looking at vocal variety, going, okay, how can I start cutting some of these filler words to be a more dynamic, engaging speaker?
So, Eva, we've mentioned it twice, but we haven't dove into it. We're going to do it now. Storytelling. So, I'm going to
Yes.
tell you a little story about filler words, and then can we dovetail into
Yes,
your
absolutely.
wonderful thought process on storytelling to share with the folks? So, Eva, when I was a senior in high school, we had public speaking. The teacher's name was Martin. I loved him. He would do this. He would have us come up to the front of the class, and if we said like, or any of those filler words, he would make the class go like buzzer, like and all the classmates would sit there waiting for those words, and it would be needless to say, it worked. And it wasn't mean, it was fun. Everybody would laugh, and it wasn't meant to be mean. It was meant to create self-awareness of our speaking style. He was giving us a gift, but it was so valuable at that young age to learn, hey, be aware of those are the big ones. And then there's others. We all develop those as we go. So, but that was such a gift. So that's a little story I shared with you in the audience. Now I want to know your expert opinion on the value of storytelling.
Well, I love what you shared there because you vividly took us into that story. And I always say the reason why you want to share more stories in your speech is there's several reasons. One, you want to give the speech that only you can give. Well, how do you get there? You get there from sharing stories, your expertise, your framework, all of those things. But storytelling is one of the best ways to distinguish yourself from anyone else that could give that message. You want to give the speech that only you can give. Storytelling's really, really hard. So I wanted to kind of bring it to life, Chris. I'm going to use that example you just gave since everyone just heard that story. So I always say when you're looking at your speech and you're like, oh, I want to share a story, what story, whether it's a personal story, also feel the freedom to share, amazing stories from history or other stories. But saying it's your story, one of the first things you want to do, I encourage speakers to fully write out their stories, their opens and their closes, just because it will help you solidify what happened in the story and what all it was about. And then I want you to go up with no notes on your personal stories, because those are the parts of the speech where you should be speaking from the heart and not from notes. But that being said, so we're going to take your story and we're going to go, what questions are we asking of this to make it really come to life in my speech? And the first one is just what happened. The next thing you'd be asking of your story is, how did I feel when that happened? Your word choice really makes a big difference of pulling the feelings. So maybe in the case of your story, if you're using it, maybe you'd share like, I remember the first time that bell rang, that buzzer went, I remember feeling so embarrassed because Jenny, my big crush, was looking at me in the corner or whatever, but like pulling the feeling of like, were you embarrassed? Were you empowered? Were you inspired? But telling us how you felt when that story happened. And then, our stories need to have a point. So asking, what's the point of my story? Why am I sharing it? What's the bottom line? Think, what's the Aesop fable of my story? What's that one liner that's, again, not about me, but the universal truth for my audience in my story? So if you're sharing the story in the speech, maybe you take a profound lesson out of it and saying, and what I learned from Martin was, we can always improve no matter where we are. Or that was one of the best lessons I ever learned. You kind of already had that seeped within there, but making sure you have a point to your story. Asking, does my story need humor or does it need heart? And then, most important, what should I cut? I just told you to add all of these things. Well, you're not giving us a 15-minute thing about that great story you just shared in a minute. So it's not that you're necessarily going to use all of these details, but even just getting your brain around the story that you're trying to share, asking some of these questions of it, determining, okay, what is the most interesting part of the story to share with my audience and where should I start? It can make a huge difference in your storytelling.
Eva, what got you here? What in your experiences in radio at Ramsey and all of your background has you in a spirit of giving and helping people? It's such a valuable tool, my goodness, to public speak. There's not a human around that wouldn't raise their hand and say, I'd love to get better. Even if they're politicians giving 7 speeches a day. How did you get here?
Yeah, great question. Well, I think that variety of things. A really big catalyst moment for me actually happened in kind of my mid late 20s. I was radio producer of a nationally syndicated show, and a big piece of my job was interviewing potential guests. I would call them on the phone. I'd record it for 20 minutes. And then if they were good, I'd share a little pitch, 2 to 3 minute clip to share with a larger group of, hey, this is this person. This is what they talk about. This is why I think they'd be a good fit. A lot of these potential guests had written books with traditional publishers, which is not easy to get a traditional book deal. It's still hard. It was hard then, it's hard now. And I started doing these phone interviews with people, and I realized here they had written this incredible book, great life lessons, great stories, and they didn't know how to share their stories at all. They would, get on the phone and like they just wouldn't be able to share them. So I had this idea in my late 20s. I'm like, I am going to start a business and I'm going to call it From Book to Mic, taking the page to the platform. I thought this was so clever at the time. But really like that kind of became a passion. But I grew up in a family of entrepreneurs. And so my entire childhood was spent making and selling wooden weapons at Renaissance festivals, like full on swords, shields, dressing up in Renaissance garb. And since I had grown up around a lot of entrepreneurs and a family of them, I'm like, oh, starting your own business is a lot of work. And it is. I was confirmed with that when I started my own. But over the years, a couple decades working alongside some of the nation's top speakers and pastors and authors. And I just started realizing a lot of public speaking things, there's a lot of things that all these great, dynamic presenters just know how to do that the rest of us don't. And so I became really passionate about how can I share some of these ideas that the great speakers do and make them more accessible to everybody. Because sometimes what distinguishes those good speakers from those great speakers are not huge content changes, they're not big delivery changes. Sometimes they can just be really small things. Nuanced things like, wow, you should let your audience see your palms within the first minute of speaking because we're more trusting of people when we see their palms. Or if you want people to engage with you after speaking, you should drop your name once during your speech in a simulated conversation and little things like that. And sometimes they can be these big things. They know how to organize content. They're thought leaders that change the culture, or they're really, really dynamic with their presence. But I wanted to just I feel like I'm overall on a mission to make the world a better place, one speech at a time, one speaker at a time. Truly, it's just a skill like any other. And a lot of these people you see that are great, that are incredible, that are dynamic, they had to learn it too. They do the work too. You see them on the stage and you're like, wow, I know that speaker makes $250,000 to speak. Yeah, because they put years and years and years into the practice and into the craft. And you can do that too. It's not limited to somebody else. It's available to all of us. And I truly believe public speaking is one of the best ways we can grow ourselves and grow our careers and truly share our story and our messages with the world.
Okay, all-star moments. First thought, best thought. And coincidentally, and I wrote this down, but you mentioned it throughout our conversation. Who's your favorite comedian and why, and what do you like about their delivery?
Ooh, I love Nate Bargatze. And just because I think his content is so funny, I think he's just what I love about it is it's just they say that humor is most funny when we notice the everyday experiences. It's kind of like the reason Seinfeld was popular for almost a decade. But I love Nate's ability to just really bring humor and levity to a lot of everyday experiences. So he's one of my favorites.
Awesome. Okay. What industry has the best public speakers in a general sense? But just, I'm just going to ask you your gut reaction when I ask you that question.
Ooh, so I think naturally, I don't know if it counts because it's communication related. I do think those who have some level of theater background can be really strong. In general leadership, I think there's a lot of really great speakers in the leadership space.
What advice would you give a new career CEO, leader, somebody at any level if tomorrow they want to improve their ability to public speak?
Yeah, well, I would say start reading books and join a Toastmasters club or some, hire a speech coach, but start. One of my favorite books on the topic that I reference all the time is Speak Like Churchill, Stand Like Lincoln. It was written by a presidential speechwriter. It's almost a 20-year-old title, but the content is so good. So just start reading, start reading a book, start watching a TED Talk every day and just start observing, hey, what do they do that I like?
Eva, this has been tremendous. This has been absolutely tremendous. I cannot thank you enough.
Well, and this has been so fun. I have loved it.
And we thank Eva very much for being on the show. How much value did she bring to this conversation? My goodness. The takeaways are plentiful. Look at my notes. They're all over the place. All over. I couldn't stop writing. I needed more paper. I told that story and she dissected it as the professional that she is. She said, what did you see? What did you feel? What did you hear? What was it like walking in the room? Take us back. What did you look at? Were you looking out the window? Were you looking at the person in the front row that was your best friend or you had a crush? Remember what she said? Paint the picture so people lean in and they want to listen to you. That was so valuable. Number two, always be in service of the audience. You heard Eva. She said, make sure you're thinking about the needs of the audience, and it will also lessen your insecurities or your anxiety, your nervousness, because you are in service. You have been hired to do a job. The people that hired you believe that your talk, your message will resonate. So now just give it to people. Be in service. Here is the gift. Here are the tools. That's what Eva stressed. So valuable. And lastly, taking yourself too seriously. How many leaders or presenters get up there and they want to be serious and get all the points across and no one's listening? No one's listening to them. You got to relax a little bit. Show your personality. Tell stories. Be funny naturally, right? Make sure you're funny by rehearsing and being prepared and leaving room to ad lib or improvise, as Eva beautifully stated so clearly. If anyone's given a speech, call her, contact her, email her, DM, whatever. Look at her information. It's all in the show notes. Obviously, she was helpful in the time that she had with us today, and she can help you. My goodness. Thank you for being engaged with Keep the Line Moving. A thumbs up, a review, a recommendation, a like. Thank you, everybody. You are so valued as part of the audience each and every week of Keep the Line Moving. See you next week, everybody. Every week, you hear guests on this podcast talk about some of their biggest leadership challenges. As a leader, you want to make an impact on those you lead and reach your organization's goals, while also optimizing your time management. Wherever you are in your leadership journey, we could all use some help. This is what we focus on with our group and individual coaching services. To book a call or get more information, email me directly at chrisg@garganoleadership.com or visit our website at garganoleadership.com. For our podcast and video producer, Jack Radutsky, and our marketing coordinator, Savin Narwal, have a great week, everybody.